Hey everyone, my name is Stephanie Johnson, and today I will be doing my chapter presentation on Chapter 15, which covered organizational culture. So I'll be going over what organizational culture is, what different kinds of cultures there are in the workplace, and how managers can impact and change that culture. So to understand this chapter, the first thing that we need to do is explain what organizational culture is. So our textbook explains it as a system of shared values, norms, and assumptions that guide members' attitudes and behaviors and influences how they perceive and react to their environment. So basically, culture is going to explain how people interact with one another, how they dress, and what they do behavior-wise, all within the workplace. So there are 4 different levels of culture within a workplace that we can identify here. So the first one is going to be the artifacts. And so that is what people are wearing, events that take place on like a regular or annual basis. These are pretty much the things that you can see. They're often physical items that you participate in or that you see others participating in. The next one is going to be espoused values, and so these are explicitly stated values, such as items listed in a training manual, if there are rule books for how a job gets done, and the procedures that have to be followed. Those are going to be espoused values. The third level of culture is going to be enacted values, and so these are rules or norms that are not necessarily stated anywhere, but are generally accepted and practiced within the workplace. And then the last level is assumptions. So these are behaviors that didn't start as norms but have developed over time by employees and are now widely accepted by the organization. The textbook also talked about how leaders can create the culture within a workplace and they can largely impact it. And so an example that kind of came to mind was Pixar, because Pixar is known for having an extremely laid back and fun, just enjoyable working environment. And so John Lasseter was their leader and founder who encouraged creativity and wanted his employees to be able to express themselves in the workplace. And so I was watching a documentary on Pixar once, and it was showing how employees were like riding their bikes inside around the office, and everyone was kind of able to customize and personalize their own workspace and office. And so it was a great example of how a founder and a leader kind of opened the doors for employees to really change the culture of their own workplace. So there is a chart that kind of breaks down the culture of conflict and how people address conflict and how they handle conflict. And so to kind of review the chart here, the best one is obviously going to be up in the top right, which is collaborative. So these are people who are agreeable and active, and so they are actively going to work through conflict to try and solve a problem. Whereas someone who is disagreeable and active is going to be seen to the left of that as dominating, or below it is passive aggressive if they're not actively voicing their concerns or engaging in the situation. And lastly, agreeable but passive is going to be seen as avoidant, and so that's not contributing too much because they are just going along with what everyone else says. And so these are the 4 breakdowns and the 4 categories that you'll mainly see in the workplace with how people handle and address conflict when it arises. So the next topic here is going to be creating a culture of inclusion. So this can include things like representation of minorities within the workplace, recognizing different religious groups and holidays within an organization, and then understanding that different employees have different background and cultures of their own. People aren't necessarily going to react the same way to a situation. They're not necessarily going to view a situation the same way just because we all do have different backgrounds and cultures that are specific to us. And so the textbook gave a really good example about encouraging inclusion in the workplace. And so they had a company whose calendar was widely recognizing Christmas, which is typically a Christian holiday, but was not recognizing other religious holidays. And so what they did is they updated their calendar to reflect other major holidays. And so they were able to work with employees of other religions to kind of give them time off for their respected holiday. So one question that the book asked is, how do we assess culture in a workplace? And so a couple examples and suggestions, or the first one is going to be to observe the surrounding. So how are people dressing? How do they interact with one another, whether it's their coworkers or managers, just to get a feel for the environment there. Another suggestion was to ask questions about the culture. So this is going to be getting firsthand examples from people who currently work in the building and work in the work setting there, to get an idea of what they think of the culture, how they view it, and what impacts there. The next suggestion is to check out the website, and I would also include like the social media for the company to see how they're interacting with people, how they post, if their values are on their website, to kind of get a feel, what they think the opinion of them is here. And then lastly, getting the views of outsiders. So seeing people who don't have too much interaction, or maybe do have some interaction with the company, what their views of it are from an unbiased opinion, someone who isn't actually working in the workplace but has experience interacting with them there. And so another topic to discuss when talking about culture here is companies creating a culture of innovation and having an innovative culture within their workspace. So the textbook describes innovation as the process of creating and doing new things that are then introduced to the marketplace as products, processes, or services. And there are three main types of innovation that the textbook touched on. And so those are radical innovation, systems innovation, and incremental innovation. And so going back to the Pixar example earlier, how leaders can definitely impact and contribute to the culture, the same thing applies for innovation. The leaders do need to recognize the importance of innovation in a company and be able to foster and encourage that in the workplace. So there are a few different ways for managers to approach culture and how to deal with the culture in their workplaces here. And so the main one is going to be, if a culture is already established, just taking advantage of the existing culture that is already in place. So that is when it is functioning properly and it is best to just leave it alone. So they should still learn the culture and have a strong understanding, but mainly just leaving things as they have been occurring in the workplace there. The second approach here is going to be teaching and reiterating the organizational culture. And so that is learned through observing. A lot of places, when you begin working there, they will have new hire orientations to kind of teach the culture and have that expectation set as people enter into the workplace. And the last approach here is changing the organizational culture. So it is very difficult to change a culture because you are changing the behavior and the opinions of people who have already worked there and have grown accustomed to it. And so there are some cases where it is necessary to change culture. If it isn't an effective culture or it is very negative, then it can be brought upon there. But it is just something to keep in mind that it is very difficult for managers to do that within a company. And so kind of to summarize everything together here regarding organizational culture, organizational culture is the primary values that do embody and are represented within a company. These values can be informal or formal, just depending on whether they're explicitly stated and enforced, or if they are just more casual norms around the office. Next, management does play a large role in encouraging and fostering culture, as well as innovation and creativity within the workplace. And then lastly, like we said, it is just very difficult to change culture, but in some instances it is necessary for managers to take that step to start influencing and creating a new culture within the organization there. And so my two questions for this presentation are just going to be, what is something that you currently like about your workplace culture? And then if you could change one thing in your current workplace culture, what would you recommend changing? So thank you guys for watching my presentation here on Chapter 15, which was Review and Organizational Culture. And I hope that this was able to kind of break down all the moving parts that go into workplace culture, establishing it, maintaining it, changing it, and kind of give a better definition and description to it here. But I have really enjoyed working with everyone throughout this class, and I wish everyone just the best of luck moving forward here in all of your other courses and in this program. Thanks.